Here. Turn the phone on Do Not Disturb because we're doing important business right now. How's your day going, Brandon?
Pretty good.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll just jump on right into this since you got to get going here in about a half an hour. How was Wicked Warzone this weekend? Did you have a good time? Is it better than usual? Or give us some feedback real quick.
Yeah, I think it went really well. Obviously the weather didn't cooperate a whole lot, but in January you don't usually get dealt great weather. I think out of the last 11 years of shows, we've had one weekend that had great weather. It was literally 60 something degrees, and I think that was 2015. And I remember talking with the fair board president about a week before, and it was pretty cold. It was down in the 30s. And it was Doug Omer, and I said, hey, we're going to have, nice weather, 60, 70 degrees. He goes, if we have 60 or 70-degree weather down here in January, he goes, I'll kiss your white ass. And literally the day before I went down there to kind of finish up the track, and I said, Doug, you want to do this now or you want to do it in front of everybody? He just kind of giggled, but that was beautiful weather. It's the only time we've ever had anything remotely close to nice weather.
So obviously anybody that went there, when you have bad weather like that and then everything combined, the grounds get pretty tore up. How does the fair board react when the grounds get all tore up due to the weather and all that stuff? Because, it got a little bit torn up this year.
Right. So in the past, the fair board was responsible for the entire event. We were just a contractor that came in and helped inspect cars, flag, and decide, who won or whatnot, give them the results, and they would write a check for everyone. So they were responsible for repairing everything. This year was new administration. The county actually took the facility over, and they have plans to gravel the entire infield. So everything that is grass now will be gravel, most likely by the team show, and definitely by next year's Warzone. So the damages will be to a minimum in the future, but in the past, the fair board actually fixed the majority of the issues. The team show, which we owned the rights to it, we were responsible for doing all the rut repair and planting some new grass and stuff like that.
So you mentioned in that what you were just talking about that the fair board, it was their idea for the show. Why does the fair board want to have a derby in January? Do they not know much about derby and derby people?
Well, it's actually for indoor venues when you're trying to do an indoor show, whether it be Wicked Warzone, Redneck Rumble, Blizzard Bash. You actually shoot for months that have inclement weather, cold, wet, nasty, because then you don't compete with outdoor events also for attendance. So you don't have to, concerts and stuff like that might pull some of your crowd, or maybe county fairs, or, whatever it may be. You don't want to compete against those other nice weather events, whether it be basketball games or stuff like that. So you always want kind of crummy weather or crummy times of the year to get your maximum attendance for indoor shows.
So going back to the beginning of it all, how did you get involved with the fair board and getting involved with what would now be Wicked Warzone, which it was Redneck Rumble, correct?
Correct. So the original, I actually ran Derbied and the original Redneck Rumble. So the people that promoted our county fairs ended up with Sturgis Outdoors County Fair. And I went down there to support them. Those are the rules we normally run. So I drove about an hour to go down there and run for them. And it was a pretty good little county fair derby. It come down to me and a couple of local Kentucky boys, and I got kind of a partial door shot front wheel, but I had no steering, no brakes, so it wasn't intentional. But it ended up being kind of a little skirmish there on the track, and things got a little bit out of hand, and got actually a police escort to the state line for my safety, not for anyone else's. But the Fair Board president, Doug Omer, said, "Hey, we're going to have a derby back here indoors in that facility in January." As they're loading my car on the track, I'm like, hell no. I'm like, I ain't coming back down to this motherfucker ever again. You're crazy. Everybody in the crowd was wanting to kill me. But it was back in the We Crash days. So there ends up a page, Sturgis Indoor, Redneck Rumble, January Derby, and everybody starts shit talking back and forth. So we end up running a grudge match in 2010 down there. And that's how it all kind of started. So that was the first time I'd ever ran inside the facility. And then the following 2 years, a different promoter had it because it was too big of an event for our local promoter. He didn't want to do it anymore. So Showtime picked it up for 2 years. And then it kind of got maybe a little bit much for them. They inspected a lot more of the older type cars. And it was predominantly newer Fords that were showing up. And they just kind of weren't real familiar with those type of builds. So they kind of got away from it. And they were having trouble with maybe time management. I think the one show went to like 4:30 in the morning. So we talked with the Fair Board a little bit and said, hey, here's some ideas we have. Run the one-shot deals versus heats and features because it could be nasty weather, right? So we told them, hey, let's try doing one-shot deals. That way nobody has to work on their stuff much. And it can control the time. We might have 4 or 5 hours of good entertainment. Get out of here before midnight. So that was 2014. So that's when we put that show on and had that format.
So prior to that, were you ever promoting derbies or doing anything like that?
So the crazy part of that is that was the very first show we'd ever promoted. So instead of starting with county fairs or something like that, we just jumped right in to trying one of the bigger shows in the country. We ran a lot. We've been around it, for a long time. But yeah, it was kind of a crazy idea just to think you're going to start, with one of the harder, bigger shows to do.
So what was the first show like? Was it a big success? Do you remember how it all went down?
So reality didn't kick in to what caliber of show and how, I guess, crazy it was to think that we would just step in and just do this until I got up on the mound and looked around and seen how many people were there and how many cars there was. And the first 3 minutes, so we had 5-foot class is what we called it back then. It was like country boy rules. And so it was essentially, if it looked like a car, it got to run. And it was so we could start the show on time because there's very little inspection. So first 2 minutes of the show, somebody comes in and blasts this Imperial on the side. It rolls over and catches on fire with this huge fireball that was 20 foot high, and the crowd goes crazy. And I was like, holy crap, this is a little bit much. So we get it rolled back over and get the fuel taken care of, get the fire out, everybody's safe, no issues. The very next heat, maybe it was the second heat after that, it comes down in the kicker class to, I believe, Adam Williams and Logan Duvall. And they were kind of having a little bit of a spat at that time. And Logan Duvall comes down to them two. He comes half track and drills Williams against the wall and actually blows the little plywood section out where the man gate is and shoots dirt up into the crowd. And we have to stop the show, re-secure the door, and get all the dirt back out of the crowd. So the Fair Board president's like, what in the hell have you got me into? You almost set the arena on fire. You got the gate blowed open. It was a great show, but it definitely had him on edge a little bit too.
So obviously it's an indoor show, so ventilation is a problem. How bad was the ventilation during that fire?
So gasoline doesn't put near as much smoke off as an oil-based fire, like diesel fuel or something like that. So it really wasn't bad. There was a lot of steam and stuff like that when we put the fire out, but it cleared up pretty quick.
So, have you ever had problems with the ventilation down there, or has it always went perfectly fine? Because it seems like when the fans are working, the fans are working. Have you ever had problems when they don't? Other than which class was that this past weekend? I think it was one of the bone
So not
stock
really
classes.
an issue. One time someone went to turn some lights on or something, and they turned some fans off versus what lights they were trying to get. Maybe it wasn't labeled real clear. And then one time we had an actual power outage. That little diner down the road had caught fire, and it caused the circuit to operate, and it shut all the lights and the fans off. I want to say that was in 2017, so that was kind of but never like a known issue of, having a big smoke problem.
So I want to go back on that real quick. So what do you do when all the lights are cut off and all the fans are cut off on an indoor show?
So we just put a pause. We told all the drivers more or less shut the cars off, get out. We had the records kept up in the booth of who was still running. We got all the drivers of water, and because it takes like 15 minutes for those lamps to heat back up, those mercury high pressure sodium. So it took about 10, 15 minutes for those things to get back right. And we started the show back up.
So, out of all the years you've done it, what are some of the craziest things you've ever seen in that building happen, other than that huge fire?
It probably non-derby related. I think we've had two proposals, so I feel like that's a little bit crazy. Not necessarily like derby action itself, but the fact of somebody want to get married at an event or something like that.
So, what are you thinking when somebody wants to get married at Redneck Rumble?
I guess. I mean, maybe that's both their loves. Their girls there, their passion for the sport. I mean, that's the only thing I could think of.
So, one thing I want to get into is why does everybody down there like to fight?
So, my theory there is that show starts earlier than normal than most shows. People get down there real early to get parts, and it's usually pretty cold. People drink a little bit to get warmed up, and anytime you have motorsports or even just regular competitive sports, things get a little heated. Whether it be a basketball game or maybe you're at a NASCAR race. I mean, how many times have we seen, a brawl at a football game in the last couple of years? So it's not just, Demolition Derby. It's not just Wicked Warzone or Redneck Rumble. I think anytime you have competition, you're going to have some type of altercation happen eventually. So I don't think it necessarily points to Sturgis, Kentucky by no means.
So, Clutch Marls just said in the chat, the lady climbing out of her car and fighting the lady in the stands. What? Did that happen, or do you remember that?
So I do remember that one. So I can't tell you the year because I don't remember it that specifically. But there was definitely a year that there was a lady running mini cars, and I believe maybe her recent boyfriend, or maybe they had broke up, was there with maybe a new significant other, and she had just went out of the race, and I don't think she was happy with the ending. Maybe she didn't place as well as she wanted, and the Derby was still going on, and she seen them together, and maybe they made some gesture to her, but she did. She climbed out of there, she grabbed her own header, burnt the absolute piss out of her hand. And then that didn't slow her down none, so she climbs over the fence and goes ahead and starts taking care of business. But yeah, I remember that one.
I don't think I've ever heard anything like that in my entire life. So, speaking of couples and crazy couples, one thing that you guys do all the time that I've never really seen anywhere else is you allow passengers in any class. Why is that?
So I ran a passenger derby for the first time I don't know, it's been a long before we started promoting. And I thought that was probably one of the most significant things to encourage people to want to get into the sport. And we see a lot of people that have never, been around Derby. They ride once, and they kind of get hooked and want to try it, and that's their cheapest way to get involved with the sport and see if they really do like, getting in the car and feeling some of those, hits and giving out some of those hits. But that's where it originally came from. I believe it was a show we ran for Thunder Valley Promotions over in Pinckneyville, Illinois, or DuQuoin, Illinois, if I remember right.
So, where are you from exactly? Are you from Indiana or Kentucky?
Say that again.
Where are you from exactly? Are you from Indiana or Kentucky?
So I'm from Mount Vernon, Indiana. So that's about probably 30, 35 minutes west of where Urban was in Evansville.
So, going back to Wicked for a little bit, so after you guys obviously had Redneck Rumble, what made you guys put on Wicked Team Show, or what led to that?
So the first one that actually came, well, probably the driving force of that one was going to Spring Explosion and watching that format and really enjoying that type of event and knowing there was so much demand, but there was very few of those shows that were team formatted available for drivers to get into. I mean, it was tough to get a spot at Spring X. We tried for 2 or 3 years and couldn't get a spot to run there. So we just kind of thought, man, it'd be nice to kind of bring that to some of our drivers because there is some crossover between Spring X and where we were promoting shows at the time, but there's still a lot of drivers that don't travel that far north to run. But that was uh, that was what kind of sparked our interest. Is I enjoy the team format, and I highly encourage anybody that's ever done Demolition Derby. If you haven't run a team show, I think you should do it at least once. There's nothing like being on the track with three of your best friends and being able to go out there and really work as a group and try to eliminate three or four of the other best teams or people on the track at the same time. And there's none of the stuff in the middle, guys that you're not necessarily trying to eliminate. It's you versus them. That's it. There's nothing in the middle.
Which I think I personally love team shows mainly because it centers around the fact of competition. It's either we win or you win. There's no in between. That's why I think Sam Williams is so successful out there with Gold Rush right now. It's because that's how it is all the way to the very end, and it gets rid of politics, which 99% of Derby drivers hate, unless you're on the good side of it.
Right. I agree that, I mean, especially if it just ends up one team versus the other team, but it's just a completely different dynamic to Derby. And you not only have to be a good Demolition Derby driver and builder, you have to be a good teammate. You have to be able to drive as a team. And I've seen some teams that were stacked that you think, man, these four guys are awesome. They're going to whip everybody's ass. And they get out there and just can't drive together. And they end up getting beat by an underdog team. So it adds a dynamic that you not only have to be skilled at driving, skilled at building, you have to be very intuitive to running with people that you know and be able to protect them or help them when they need it most.
I agree with you on a lot of things you said. I mean, when it comes to team shows, I believe you can tell if your team's going to win months before. Like, I've been on teams where it's like, why am I doing this? But I've also been on teams where it was like a family the entire way through. I've also been on teams where it calls me up about a month before and says, hey, we need a teammate. What are you doing? I think if you have that bond with a group of guys, I think there's no reason you shouldn't continue to run with them. You know what I mean?
No, I completely agree. I would rather be on a team with three guys that I know very well and know their driving style, know they got decent equipment, and know their commitment level to the show versus being with three guys that are, big name drivers across the nation. I'd rather have someone that I'm close with because I know where we're going to end up at.
Well said, my man. So, out of all the shows you've put on, which one was probably your favorite, or which one stands out the most? Is like, that was a great show. I can't believe we did that.
That's tough. That's tough. I liked a few of the shows that we put on at Evansville. We've had a few great shows over there. There's been some really good team shows that just, at the end of the night, you're like, man, that was some great action. Um, I fall more in line with, how facilities are, and sometimes you get different drivers that sign up that kind of make the action a little better, a little worse. But honestly, one of my favorite ones recently was Tarrant, Tennessee. That's a great facility. The mix of drivers was awesome. Um, I was really pumped about that venue, and it definitely met my expectations and maybe even more.
Speaking of terror in Tennessee, how did that show come about?
So we were looking to find another venue that was similar to Evansville. We couldn't ever really get a great relationship at Evansville when we were putting Urban Destruction on. It just never felt like home. We never had a really good connection with who was in the office. There was probably three different managers that was running that facility in the matter of, let's see, how many years did we put that one on? Six, maybe. So the connection was never there. When we were down at Sturgis, we were down there for 10 years, and it was always the same people. We felt like we were very welcomed. Uh, they were always willing to help. So that's a big key to it. Everybody just sees the very front side of Demolition Derby, the rules, the inspection, but man, there's a lot more goes into it. The insurance side of things, the facilities, how much local help you can get from businesses, the equipment support side of it. But Tennessee, from day one, it felt like home, and it was a good event. Where I loved Evansville just because of all the hotels and the location, but man, until there's some different management in that facility, it's going to be hard for us to go back.
So, so obviously it's no secret that you ended up selling Wicked Derbies to Will and Austin. Why did you decide to start getting out of it?
So I'm not quite as involved with Demolition Derby as I was, say, when we started this back in 2014. You know, in 2014, there wasn't a national event that I had traveled to either vend or watch or something. But my kids now, sports, I've got an HVAC business I started. I work full time. And if you're not actively in the Demolition Derby community, day in and day out, you don't have your thumb on the pulse of it. And doing, you're not making the correct decisions to run a business or promote shows. You got to be in there and know what the new parts are the guys are running. You got to know what's current on the builds and what type of rules do the drivers want to. If you're not even building a car, you know, a couple of times a year, I feel like you're not as connected with the sport, and it'd be hard to understand any business if you're not affiliated with it on a regular basis. It'd be like owning a fast food business and that does cheeseburgers and you're a vegan. You're not going to know if it's a good cheeseburger or not.
I agree with that. So, going off of that question, how did you get into derbying in general?
So my dad actually did Demolition Derby when I was a kid, and just kind of went from there. I always like to build things, and anytime you're allowed to legally smash the hell out of somebody else's car and not get in trouble for it, I feel like that's a pretty good sport.
So, what year did you get into derbying exactly?
Oh, Jesus. 2001, I believe, is the first show I ran. I believe so.
What was your first car and how did you do?
Say it again.
What was your first car and how did you do?
So, the first year I ran, I actually ran two different cars. I ran a 1976 Pinto wagon, and then I also ran a 1978 Chrysler New Yorker. They're both pre-ran stuff that my dad had. Um, so I think I got fifth in the mini car, and I think I got fourth in the big car. And getting fourth back then was a big deal. Like county fairs were probably 60 cars, 70 cars at a county fair. And I think I was 13 or 14 when I ran that. So it was pretty big deal, I thought. I still got the trophy from it, so.
So, what do your kids think of derbying?
Uh, my son would probably derby, but his attention span with building something for more than about an hour is pretty slim. He wants instant gratification. He wants to, maybe put brake pads on his dirt bike and then go ride it. I don't see him building a complete car for weeks on end and then going and smashing it for 5 minutes and then thinking, that was great. But, when I was probably, 12, 13 years old, that if I had to put more than a day or two's worth of work in it, I may not have ran either.
I get what you're saying, So, on all the shows you've put on, what do you think? What class seems to do the best? Like, what class does the crowd love the most? Are the drivers the best? Like, which class do you think stands out among the rest? Is it the full size? Is it the trucks? Is it the mod class? Like, what is it?
So I think Demolition Derby goes in cycles, they go from being a heavy build that everybody's into and then, to slowly trend back lighter. And then, it starts to trim back a little heavier. But, today's society's a lot busier than it used to be. People have less time. And a lot of the people at Derby have, gotten a little bit older. There's not as many younger guys get into it. But the bone stock is a lot quicker build than a lot of stuff that we used to do. But that is probably the most popular class right now for us. But, probably 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, the lighter kicker build, not what Smash it's running now, but the original kicker rules from like 2014, 2015 was very popular. We used to have to run two classes of that at Redneck Rumble just to satisfy how many drivers were trying to enter for it.
Ay, ay, ay. So, do you see derbying going back to the hard cars and the kicker cars anytime soon?
I think there's some demand for maybe let's not call them kicker cars, but cars with driveline protection. I think there's enough demand there for people that still have the ski cradles and those type of transmission braces. Just the promoter's got to come up with the right mix of rules that doesn't take a ton of time to build it and doesn't cost a whole lot of money that you're just throwing away parts that aren't reusable.
Well, the way I see it right now is I think the cycle is currently going back to full cradles. And I actually had this conversation with Pete Hansen the other night. And if you think about it, the amount of full cradles that have been sold throughout derbying, everybody still has one. I don't. Everybody sells their cradles, but everybody still has something because they're still selling them like hotcakes today. Like I was hanging out with Ski down there at Kentucky this past weekend, and he's backed up on ski cradle orders. Like everybody's still wanting full cradle, so I think that's getting back to where it's going to be at. I don't know if it's going to be pressured in, kickers welded up all the way. I don't know, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more full cradles here as the time goes on.
Yeah, I agree that there's definitely the potential to have some bigger shows with that type of driveline protection. But I think as long as the promoters keep it a little bit on the lighter build where there's not a whole lot of thrown away, excess weld, like the kicker class went to full, all four doors you could plate or skin door plates, whatever you want to call it. I mean, at current prices, hell, what is that, $500 that you're going to scrap with the car? You're not cutting them back off and reusing them. And the hump plates got to be maybe a touch too big. They went from being like the 22, 24 inches to like 32 inches. That's a lot of plate, and those things are not cheap. So if it went to more of a mild weld, but you could still run all the driveline protection, I think there'd be a lot of demand for it.
So I agree with a lot of stuff you said, but I think there's two sides you can see with that. Yes, the welding and all the cost of everything takes a lot of time. However, the price of cars is only going up, so I think that's the only way we can somewhat combat that. Because I mean, bone stock glass is amazing and all, no hump plates is great and all. However, it limits the amount of time you can run a car severely.
I see what you're saying there, but it also goes back to, if you're hitting a super hard car versus a super hard car, a car's still going to have to bend, right? If you're running a super light car versus a super light car, there's probably still going to be equal amount of damage. The problem with the really, really hard cars front and back that nothing bends, there's not a whole lot of entertainment there when all you can do is rip a front wheel off, right? So if neither end of the car is bending, it's not providing as much entertainment as a car that at least bends on one end. If I was trying to build a set of those rules for that type of equipment, maybe you make the front where it's pretty tough, but maybe the back's not quite as heavy. So at least you can try to hit somebody in the back and belly them out, and maybe limit how much, extra welding there is inside the car, limit some of the cage so it's not quite as expensive. Still make it a safe cage where the driver's area is, but maybe you don't have, as much crazy stuff for a gas tank protector area that goes all the way, through the doors, all the way back, kind of keep it in that 24 to 32 inch area that's actually protecting the fuel cell and training cooler, not just bracing the crap out of the car.
Which I think there's a happy medium for everything. I think it's just a matter of coming to that fine ground between the drivers and the promoters, because promoters want to take, promoters want to give, drivers just mainly want to take. So I think if we can figure out that in between there and that special middle ground, I think that's the key to it all. What do you think?
Well, I think sometimes people get misconstrued about what promoters want. Promoters really don't want anything rules-wise. They want to provide a rule that the drivers want. But there's nothing that I prefer one way or another. I just want to provide a good set of rules for drivers that like the rules. The drivers dictate the rules. They don't know it. But when registration happens and one class is a lame duck and feels really slow, they're dictating what class is going to happen next year, right? I don't care if it's, heavy or light or whatever it may be. I just want to provide classes that drivers want to sign up for.
Which, that makes perfect sense. I mean, do you think that, I don't know if you guys do this, but I see a lot of these promoters nowadays, they change their rules to help the so-called majority, which is basically like the loud guys. But what that ends up doing is hurting their car count because nobody really wants that. Like, I'll just use this as an example. This past year at Buried Alive, they changed the cradle. No, they didn't change the cradle rule. You were allowed a trans brace, and I think one more other thing, but I could be wrong. And that basically almost cut the car count, like, at least down by a quarter, maybe even a half, because it eliminates an entire group of guys that don't want to do any of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. And I can't speak on behalf of any other promoters. I don't know what they're thinking or how they think. so I can't speak on behalf for them. But what dictates how our rule changes happen? So we review our tech sheets and say, in a 20 car class, 15 cars have the same problem. I'll write it down. Let's just say uh, maybe it's down leg placement. You know, I thought the rules were written clearly enough that the down leg had to be, in front of the door seam. But 15 out of the 20 cars come and the down leg is in the middle of the door. So I go back and read the rules. It's not very clear. That's how we dictate our rules. We go and see what type of changes did majority of the drivers not understand or couldn't comply with, and then we go from there. We don't necessarily change it because, Timmy Too Cool, he beat us on this rule and we had to let him by with it. We try to go off facts and inspection sheets to drive how our rules change over time. And we try not to change them a bunch because a lot of guys buy these parts and these different types of wheels and bumpers and they want to be able to run these parts for several years. But if you change your rules every dang year, now all of a sudden they got to change their equipment a lot. That'll sometimes steer drivers to other shows.
Makes perfect sense, my man. Well, I know you got to get to football practice here shortly, so I'll ask you one more question. That is, so what's the future of Derby looking like for you in the coming years? And that's about it, my man.
So we still got, we got a lot of shows on the books, and I'm going to be helping Austin and Will and Wicked for, several years to come. But I think, the future's bright. There's a lot of new young drivers that are getting in. We're still picking up a lot of new faces. I mailed out 1099s, essentially 1099 MISC forms, and there was 19 different drivers that won more than $600 last year. So we're getting a good mix of drivers. You've seen Sturgis had a lot of new faces that hadn't won money there before. I think that's great. When you get a good mix and it's not the same people over and over winning money, that just draws a bigger crowd next time of people. I think there was around 340 different drivers tried to register for Wicked Warzone, Redneck Rumble, Sturgis, whatever you want to call it. So 340 different people were trying to get essentially 125 spots.
That's awesome.
So that shows how much demand is out there for the sport still.
100%, my man. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. I know you got to get to football practice here real quick, so I don't want to hold you up. You got anything else you want to say before we get off of here?
No, that was it. I kind of apologize for the mic not working right and having to jostle the camera around to kind of hear what's going on, but I enjoyed coming on, and I talked to several people down at Sturgis, and they kind of had some questions of how I thought things went, and I think it went great. I mean, there's for the one part is, it was the fair board that was doing some of the stuff before, and this time it was 100% us, and the county was over the facility. I think our crew did a very good job of getting the cars on and off the track without damaging anything, where before a lot of the volunteers were like farmers and they're just not familiar with how to handle demolition derby cars. They don't understand you can't run a fork underneath this thing because there's a $700 drive shaft underneath there and a pinion brake, and so that was a major improvement. And I did not hear a whole lot of complaints at the gates from like vendors and spectators if maybe the gate workers were a little bit rude. We didn't have that issue this year where a lot of those people were volunteers, and they might get a little crabby. It's cold, it's wet. These were our people working, so I didn't hear any of those type of comments. So those were improvements.
Awesome. The only problem with that show is the weather.
Yeah, fortunately for us, it's indoors. Maybe next year we'll get a little better weather, but if that's the only downfall to the whole weekend, we did pretty good.
I think you guys did a wonderful job this weekend, my man. I had a great time down there. Other than the fact I forgot boots and I was freezing all weekend, it was a great weekend. You guys should be proud of that
Absolutely.
one.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna swing in here to football practice. Appreciate you having me on. If you guys ever need anything, feel free to reach out.
Sounds good, my man. Thank you for coming on.
All right, sir. Have a good one.
Yep, you too.
Bye.
Awesome. And then, so before we get off here real quick, I want to go read through the winners list from this past weekend. Just get to, where did this one go? All right, here we are. So, Winter Warzone 2024 results. This is all winners and 1 through 3 from this past weekend. Compacts, we have Tank Smith taking first place, Tyler Collins taking second place. Third place was Curtis Rankers. And then in the co-pilot class, it was won by Andrew Barber and Brandon Palmer. He was repping a Fouché Spade and Fab engine in there. I know because he had the shirt, and I got a big old hug from Adam Fouché after them boys won. Second place was Trey Alexander and Floyd Guines, I think. Could be wrong. Sorry about that. Third place was Tyler Barber and Austin Turner. And then after that, we had End of Year Bone Stock. We had Jacob Denham. Second place was Kane Smith. Third place was Michael Hodges. 80s and newer bone stock. 80s and up bone stock, my bad. We had Cody Simonton with the first place check. Second place was Jordan Shepard. Third place was little man Charlie Roby. And then finally, to wrap up the night in the Wicked Weld class, Cody Collins came out with first place. Second place was Michael Voss. And third place was Zach Walton. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys got to get a chance to either go or check out Wicked Warzone, watch us on stream. It was a great stream. I love hanging out with old Steve Buckman and Mark Klein over there at the BPV crew. Thank you guys all for tuning in. We shall see you next week. Oh, and before I forget, all the shows have been moved to not Monday. Why would I do it on a Monday? That's dumb. Anyways, they all have been moved to Wednesdays. Mainly because everybody's doing podcasts. Well, let's be honest with ourselves, you guys. This is the coolest podcast there is. So I want everybody to watch it live. See my beautiful face. See these cheekbones? You love them. So I moved it to Wednesday. Should be great, you guys. Thank you all for tuning in. We shall see you on the next one.